Hello, I'm Bobby Miles from Texas Skid Steer, and I want to address a question that I get asked almost every single day of the week, and that is how long will a skid steer loader last? Now, that's not an easy, question to answer because a skid steer is not just one piece that, simultaneously breaks down. A skid steer loader is made up of a lot of different things. So, you have the engine and the hydraulics. You have the pumps and the drive motors. You've got wiring, you've got tracks or tires. You've got a lot of things make up a skid steer loader. So saying how long will they last? Well, which part of the skid steer are we talking about? But I do think that most people, when they ask that question, they're really asking how long does the engine last? And as far as an engine, I really think a good rule of thumb that I have found is that not all of them last the same, but there's a good rule of thumb to go by. It's not science, it's not perfect, but it'll hit it pretty close. If you have a 40 horsepower engine and a skid steer loader, that machine will last approximately 4,000 hours before it has to have an overhaul. And if it's a 60 horsepower machine, about 6,000 hours. An 80 horsepower machine, about 8,000 hours. Now, before it has to have an overhaul. It can last a lot longer than that. You just overhaul it and, keep on trucking. Or, digging or whatever you're doing with your skid steer loader. And, that's a good rule of thumb for the engine part. Now, keep in mind, overhauling the engine, when it starts getting a little excess of, blow by, put your hand over the oil cap and feel air coming out of there. If you can feel it at 4 or 5 inches, have some oil coming out, depending on the system, but blow by, if you can feel it several inches above the oil cap, well, it's got some blow by and it means it has some wear. And using the rule of thumb that I gave you on 40 horsepower for 4,000 hours and 60 horsepower for 6,000 hours and 80 horsepower going 8,000 hours, I would say get an overhaul before you get to that point. They don't all last that long, and they don't all go out before that. That's a rule of thumb. But if you'll overhaul the engine when it gets to having, excessive blow-by, they start using oil, go ahead and overhaul them. But those numbers are they're just a good average amount of hours, depending on the horsepower of the engine, that you really might consider going ahead and spending, $2,000 to $3,000 to go ahead and overhaul the engine before you have something worse happen, like a rod going through the side of the block and, having an engine that you can't even overhaul, and then you're out, searching for a used engine or, possibly, looking for a new machine. So that's that's good information to know about the engine. Now on the tracks, I have seen rubber tracks wear out in 500 hours. Now most of them don't. A set of rubber tracks that wear out in 500 hours have probably been used in a rock quarry, and a set of tracks that last 2,500 hours, they've probably been on farm dirt their whole life. So the average life of tracks is probably somewhere in between that. Let's just say 1,500 hours is average for a set of tracks whose that is used sometimes on some rock, most of the time on the dirt. Just it's used a little bit for a little bit of everything. About 1,500 hours for a set of tracks. Now on the hydraulics, I look at the hydraulics, in a similar way to looking at the transmission on an automobile. The hydraulics may last as long as the engine, but usually you will have some hydraulic problems before you have, engine problems. And like I was comparing them to a transmission on an automobile, and the reason I was doing that is sometimes they'll have some telltale signs that there's problems with them, such as leaks or whining or weakness in, the way they steer, etc. And sometimes there's just no warning at all. They just go out. And anybody that tells you any different than that, they're just not shooting straight with you. Anyway, I wanted to, give you that information about how long a skid steer will last. Well, it'll last as long as you keep fixing it. That's how long it'll last. You've probably seen some automobiles going down the highway that were, 50 years old. They just kept fixing what broke. But as far as how long will they last in general, use that 40 horsepower to 4,000 hours, 60 horsepower to 6,000 hours, and 80 horsepower to 8,000 hours, and you'll find out that you'll hit it pretty close. If you need some help with specific questions about skid steer loaders, please give me a call at 817-668-1018. Oh, and by the way, please go by our website, texasskidsteer.com. Check out our inventory. Have any questions? Give me a call. Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Bobby Miles from Texas Skid Steer. Y'all have a wonderful evening.